Today, we have a topic, I think, of extreme relevance and importance in light of the fact that yesterday we lost someone who is arguably the most iconic scholar of not just our era, but frankly, of our century. Somebody whose lifespan literally spanned an entire Hijri century, 100 years. He was beginning his 100th year, Hijri years, 96 Gregorian years. And of course, the scholar is none other than Sheikh Allama Yusuf al-Qaradawi. And he was without a doubt the most beloved scholar to the largest group of the Ummah. It is factually correct to state that no one of our era rivaled his popularity and respect. And yet still, as with all such figures, he was also the subject of controversy and even rejection by some segments of the Ummah. So in today's lecture, I will insha'Allah ta'ala try my best to be analytical and factual. I will try my best to summarize the positive and what others claim is the negative and contextualize that and summarize the key points, not just of his biography, but of his legacy. What did he really try to do? How and why did he rise to such popularity and fame? And of course, in the process as well, what did he do that irritated so many large groups of people as well, such that he was banned from many countries? He was on the quote-unquote terrorist list of not just our country, but even some Muslim countries and whatnot. So today's lecture, inshallah, I hope to summarize in 45 minutes or so, as much as possible. But I would also like to state, for the record, you should be aware, even if I'm going to try to be neutral, I'm going to try to be historical, you should be aware that I am biased. Of course I'm biased. We're all biased. And I have my own position towards this person. And I have said many times, and I'm not making a secret of this, that I am somebody who considers myself to be inspired by his writings and who views him with the utmost respect. And I will be, again, I'm trying to be unbiased, but you must know my biases. Because no matter how unbiased you try to be, still, your biases are going to be known and shown. So I will confess, and I have no problems in this confession, that I view Sheikh Qaradawi to be, if not the mujaddid of our era, definitely amongst the mujaddids of our era. And I have been fortunate and blessed to benefit from and be inspired by many of his fatwa. And I quote, a lot of times I will say, oh, this is the position of Sheikh Qaradawi, meaning it's my opinion, but I'm going to quote Qaradawi and use him to back up my opinion. Many times if you ask me a question, I will say this. And I'm also somebody who has read many of his books, and I was very blessed and fortunate to have a one-on-one audience with him a few years ago where I asked him a series of questions. If we have time, we'll talk a little bit about that as well. So I met him in Doha, and I interacted with him for a few hours. So with that bias put aside very clearly, let us begin summarizing his life, his times, his activism, his methodology, some of his most significant fatwas, and some of the controversial fatwas that raised some eyebrows, and maybe even more than just some eyebrows. Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi was born in a small village in western Egypt outside of Cairo on September 9th, 1926. His father passed away when he was 2 years old, and so his uncle was put in charge of raising him. At a very young age, Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi was taken to Cairo with his family, and he was enrolled in Al-Azhar University's primary school. Al-Azhar University, as you know, the bastion or one of the main bastions of academic Islam, and it has as well a high school and an intermediate school and a primary school. Not a lot of people know this. It has a primary, intermediate, and high school. Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi was enrolled in the primary, and then intermediate, and then high school. And he graduated at the top of his high school class. Then he went on to do, it wasn't called a bachelor's at the time, but the equivalent of a bachelor's degree, graduating in 1953, the top of the entire university. Then he went on to do, again, it wasn't called that, but the equivalent of a diploma and 2 masters. So a diploma and then 2 masters. The first master's was in Arabic literature and adab, and the second master's was from the College of the Quran and Sunnah in 1960. Both of them, he was the top of the entire batch of his college. And eventually, he finished a PhD in 1973 with the highest distinctions possible. And his dissertation was about the role of zakah and the contemporary issues of zakah. and this was eventually converted into a 2-volume book called Fiqh al-Zakah, which has been translated into English, and it remains one of the most scholarly treatises ever written about zakah from a classical and from a contemporary point of view. So, Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi is an Azhari through and through. You cannot get more Azhari than him. From primary all the way to PhD, along the way a diploma and 2 masters, and at every single level topping his class or topping the entire university. Even in his high school, by the way, he didn't just top the university, he was the 2nd highest in the entire country of Egypt. So in those days, I think even in other countries, they had the list of all the students of the country taking the high school. Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi came number 2 in the entire country, and then number 1 at Al-Azhar throughout his entire time over there. Throughout these formative years, the 50s and 60s, he himself remarks that he was influenced by a number of people. And these are people that were previous to him or slightly older than him. As for previous to him, 2 people, Sheikh Rashid Rida and Ustad Hassan al-Banna. As for Sheikh Rashid Rida, he deserves an entire lecture. Maybe one day I will give a lecture here or in my home in the library chats that I do. He is a figure that, again, I respect and admire immensely, and somebody who has had a profound impact. One can truly say that Sheikh Qaradawi is the modern version of Sheikh Rashid Rida. 100 years ago, Sheikh Rashid Rida's status was the only and the first global mufti. Whether you like him or you don't, factually speaking, Sheikh Rashid Rida was a household name across the Muslim world 100 years ago. There was nobody similar to him in that realm. A lot of people loved him, a lot of people did not like him at all. The same can be said of Sheikh Qaradawi. And in many ways, Sheikh Qaradawi is really the intellectual heir to Sheikh Rashid Rida. Again, Ustad Rashid Rida deserves an entire lecture on his own. For those who know his biography and story, very, very quickly, Sheikh Rashid Rida was somebody who considered himself to be a revivalist. He wanted to revive the ummah, and he publicly said so, from an intellectual stagnation to take on the challenges of colonization, the challenges of the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. And he felt that Islamic knowledge was more than just reading classical books. You had to become active in the modern world, engage with the people around you, engage with the colonizers. You couldn't just sit in the masjid and do durus and halaqat. Islam meant more than just this. So Sheikh Rashid Rida is a very interesting, dynamic figure. Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi did not meet Rashid Rida, even though he was born 12 years before Sheikh Rashid Rida passed away, but they never met together. But the impact, he himself says, obviously this is of his era. You know the person, you know his writings, and he absorbed that ethos, that spirit. As for Ustad Hassan al-Banna, Imam Hassan al-Banna, he is the founder, of course, of the Muslim Brotherhood. Hassan al-Banna directly met Yusuf al-Qaradawi as a teenager. And Yusuf al-Qaradawi was in high school, and Hassan al-Banna came to give a lecture in Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi's class, and so he was directly inspired by Imam Hassan al-Banna. And of course, Hassan al-Banna should be known to all of you. He is the founder of the Ikhwan al-Muslimin, or the Muslim Brotherhood, until he was assassinated in 1949 by the regime. So Hassan al-Banna had a direct impact and a one-on-one, I mean, not a strong relationship, but they met and they knew each other, and he himself was inspired by Hassan al-Banna. As for those who are slightly older than him, 2 names should be mentioned. The first of them, perhaps many of you wouldn't have heard of his name, but he is very famous in the Arab world. His name is the same as the famous scholar of Islam, Al-Ghazali. This is exactly Muhammad al-Ghazali. There's 2 Muhammad al-Ghazalis. There's the classical, the one who wrote Ihya Ulumuddin, the one who lived 900 years ago, that Al-Ghazali. Then you have a modern, contemporary thinker, well known. You have interviews of him, many books he wrote. His name is Dr. Muhammad al-Ghazali. So if you say Imam al-Ghazali, you mean the classical. And if you say Dr. al-Ghazali, you mean the modern guy. So Muhammad al-Ghazali, the thinker, the alim, the sheikh, was slightly older than Sheikh al-Qaradawi and had an impact on him. And Muhammad al-Ghazali was also of the same fikr or the same school as Rashid Rida. And another person of the same school of Rashid Rida and who lived a very long life and whose name most of you should be aware of is the famous Sheikh and Alim of Azhar, Sayyid Sabiq. Sayyid Sabiq, who wrote the famous book, Fiqh al-Sunnah. Fiqh al-Sunnah, that book Fiqh al-Sunnah by Sayyid Sabiq. So Shaykh al-Qardawi considers him to be a mentor as well. So this is amongst the modern ulama. As for the classical ulama, Shaykh al-Qardawi would quote Ibn al-Qayyim quite a lot. And he was influenced by all of the mainstream scholars of Sunni Islam. He was never sectarian minded. So you will find him quoting Imam al-Ghazali and Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah. You will find him not to be sectarian, only one of the strands, as advanced students are aware that within Sunnism there are multiple strands. And generally speaking, Rashid Rida's school, which Hassan al-Banna and Yusuf al-Qadawi is a part of, they don't want to exacerbate the tensions within mainstream Sunnism. They consider all of these scholars to be looked up to. And so you find Shaykh Yusuf al-Qardawi benefiting from the writings of all of the spectrum of mainstream Islam. And in particular, one of the scholars whom Shaykh Yusuf al-Qardawi perhaps helped revive interest in is a famous Andalusian scholar by the name of Ash-Shatibi, Imam Ash-Shatibi. Imam Ash-Shatibi was from Andalus, classical, Andalusian heritage. And Imam Ash-Shatibi was an expert in a particular field. Some say he was the founder, but that's not quite accurate. But he's definitely one of the ones who popularized the field. This field, Shaykh Yusuf al-Qardawi utilized it in his fiqh. What is this field? This field is called the field of Maqasid al-Sharia, the goals of the Sharia. Imam al-Shatibi, 600 years ago, 700 years ago, he wrote the most famous encyclopedia and compendium of the goals of the Sharia. It's called Al-Muwafaqat. It's 6 volumes. It is one of the most interesting and out-of-the-box books in which the purpose is not to go over every single law. The purpose is to discuss the psychology of the law, the philosophy of the law. What are the goals of the Sharia? Why did Allah legislate? Not what is legislated, but what is the goal of legislation? So this is a science that is a very intricate, very deep, you can understand it's a very philosophical science. Few people really master it. And Imam al-Shatibi is considered to be its main figure. And Shaykh Yusuf al-Qardawi was a huge fan of Imam al-Shatibi. And this is reflected in his fiqh. That we're going to come to this point. He's utilizing the notion of maqasid, of looking at the goals of the Sharia and not just looking at specific texts out of context. He's looking at the text within the context that we find ourselves in. So these are some of his main figures of inspiration. Shaykh Yusuf al-Qardawi, given the political climate of his time, because he was involved informally with the Brotherhood, the Muslim Brotherhood, in the late 50s and early 60s, there was a huge crackdown against the Ikhwan al-Muslimin by the Egyptian president Gamal Abdel Nasser. And Gamal Abdel Nasser imprisoned thousands, not hundreds, thousands of ulama. Literally thousands of scholars were imprisoned, and even those that were very minor in that time. So at the time, Yusuf al-Qardawi is a master student. He's not like a big shot sheikh. Still, he was caught up. And again, if you study that era, this was a repressive tyrant who really had an axe to grind with the religious folks. He really had an issue with religiosity because he realized these were a threat to his regime. So he imprisoned thousands of ulama. You are well aware that he eventually executed Sayyid Qutb, and he tortured Zainab al-Ghazali, very vicious. And you have the memoirs of Zainab al-Ghazali, which is a must read. You should read the memoirs of Zainab al-Ghazali, how she describes the torture in those Egyptian prisons. And it was an era of great persecution for religious people. Yusuf al-Qardawi was caught up and jailed not once, 3 times. In the late 50s, early 60s, by Gamal Abdel Nasser. And he was imprisoned and in all likelihood tortured, because that was the default when you go into those prisons, for a total of 1.5 years. 3 different prison stints, 1.5 years. And he realized, as did many of the scholars, there was a mass exodus of Egyptian intelligentsia in the late 60s, early 70s. A mass exodus. Lots of smart people, engineers, doctors, lawyers, and religious clergy, they fled. And this led to many things in different lands. Yusuf al-Qardawi did not flee. He visited Qatar for a visiting job in 1961, and he realized that it is better for him to then permanently leave Egypt because of the persecution and whatnot, and to settle in Qatar. And so in 1961, he moved to Qatar, and eventually lived the rest of his life there, getting citizenship. The royal family in Qatar, the founder of the Qatar dynasty in the 70s really loved Sheikh Qardawi, and basically gifted him a citizenship. And Sheikh Qardawi was then instrumental in founding many of the key institutions in Qatar. He founded the Islamic Studies Department in Qatar University. He became the Dean of the Sharia College of Qatar in 1977, and he remained the Dean all the way until he retired 1990, and he continued to live in Qatar until he passed away yesterday, 26th of September 2022. And in fact, his impact on the country of Qatar, you can quite literally say that it has been felt in the country's domestic and foreign policy. And that's all I will say. You do your own research and figure that out, that his impact has been so great that the entire country, frankly, has a different trajectory than other countries right around that particular country. Let's just leave it at that. And Sheikh Qardawi would remark on this move from Egypt to Qatar, and he said in one of his lectures, "Nobody can accuse me of hypocrisy, because I was offered to stay in Egypt," because again, he's an Azhari through and through, and he's going to make his way if he wanted to. "I was offered to stay in Egypt, and if I gave the government what they wanted to hear, I would have risen all the way to the top." He would have been, the Shaykh al-Azhar and the Grand Mufti. He was literally, the top of the class. He had everything. He had all the boxes marked. If you really wanted to become the Grand Mufti or the Chief of al-Azhar or the Shaykh of the Mashayikh al-Azhar, he had it all. He gave that all up, and he gave up his residence and family, and he went into his extended family, and he went into self-imposed exile. For 40 plus years, he went into self-imposed exile away from his family, because he said, "I chose to remain firm to my deen and leave my land in order to speak the truth." So he would say, nobody can accuse me of wanting this dunya. I gave everything up, and I gave my position up in order to be able to speak the truth. Sheikh Qardawi has written, now how many books has he written? If you read his biography, some say 120, some say 170, some say over 200. Fact of the matter is, what do you mean by books? If you mean actual printed books that are more than pamphlets, probably around 120 or so. But if you mean lengthy articles and whatnot, then yes, over 200. So it depends on how you want to define, writings. But his writings span all of the genres of Islam. Fiqh, Aqidah, Tazkiyah, political science, history, any field you have, Quran, Tafsir, Seerah, any genre you can think of, and you have writings of Shaykh al-Qardawi in this. And there's no doubt that his most famous writing is Al-Halalu wal-Haramu fil Islam, the lawful and the prohibited in Islam. This book was written in the 60s, early 60s. It is one of his first books that he wrote. And this book encapsulates the thought, the fikr, the ideology, the methodology of Shaykh al-Qardawi. Because this book, no matter what you want to say about it, like it or don't like it, you must recognize that this is a book that is thinking outside of the box. What this book did was it quite literally redid how to teach fiqh to a modern audience. There is no book like it in any language, and that is why it became and it remains a bestseller. Even though 60 years have gone by, it remains a bestseller, because there is nothing like it. To take the laws of fiqh and the books of fiqh and to present them in a style and language and manner that a modern mind can comprehend. Get rid of the, chapters that are not relevant and redo them. The rulings are there. They're not going to change the rulings. But how do you teach fiqh to a modern mind? I challenge you to go read any classical translated matan, right? And then compare it to halal and haram in Islam. And you will see for yourself what is the manhaj and the methodology of Shaykh Qardawi. He wants to bring classical tradition and make it accessible to the modern world. And in order to do so, he has to rethink through many issues. And the book Al-Halal wal-Haram fil Islam, it has been printed over 35 times, translated into a dozen languages, including in English. In 1987, ISNA's branch ATP translated into English, and it is widely available. You can purchase it and see it for yourself. It's divided into 4 chapters or 4 sections. That's not chapters, 4 sections. The first section is about the concept of halal and haram and its role in Islam with a comparison to other laws and other traditions and other civilizations, i.e., we are Muslims, this is why we have halal and haram. And other civilizations have their versions of lawful and prohibited. The second section, personal laws, laws of eating, laws of drinking, laws of working and earning money. The third section, family laws, marrying, divorce, inheritance, children. And the fourth section, communal and society laws, Islam's stances towards other cultures, other civilizations, other ideologies. Islam stands towards societal issues, even entertainment, culture and custom. So you look at this book and you don't need any training in fiqh to read it. And you can gain a lot of fiqh knowledge by reading this book, whereas factually speaking, most books of fiqh, you need some training, you need a teacher, you need a guide, you have to unpack the complex, literature and language and whatnot. So this is one of his, it is his most famous book, Al-Halal wal-Haram fil Islam. Another popular book of his was about modern Islamic political science and activism, and it was translated into English under the title Islamic Awakening Between Rejection and Extremism. Islamic Awakening, the Sahwa, the movement, the global Islamic revival between rejection and between extremism. So you have rejection of Islam, secular-minded people, progressives, and you have extremism. You have so many movements, they become completely bubble and isolated. They have visions and versions of Islam that are simply incompatible with the modern world. You have the ISIS, you have others in other places. It seems as if they're disconnected from reality. So this was a book in which he critiques these two extremes and tries to find what he calls wasatiyya. And this is a key word for Shaykh Qardawi, wasatiyya, moderation. He would always say, we have a religion that is moderate. We are not a bunch of fanatics on either side. We are an ummatan wasata. So this is another book of his, and you can find it in English as well. Triple IT translated it, Islamic Awakening Between Rejection and Extremism. And his latest book, and some would say his most erudite and scholarly, is his 2-volume book, Fiqhul Jihad, which has not yet been translated, Fiqhul Jihad, which was released was it 8-9 years ago, as a response to the rise of ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And he wanted to reclaim what is real jihad, not what these people are doing. What is the actual meaning of jihad in the Quran and Sunnah and the books of fiqh in light of modernity? Because the problem comes, this is a very deep topic. This is not the time to, I'm not shying away, but this is not the topic. These radical groups would quote you manuals of fiqh justifying their barbarism. They would say, this is what Ibn Qudama says, this is what Nawawi says. And the average Muslim, if you remember what they were doing, the average Muslim's like, what do we do with this? And you needed somebody like Shaykh Qardawi to say, hey, you cannot take Ibn Qudama in 7th century Damascus, cut and paste him and apply him in the modern world. There's a context, there's a time, there's a place. Ibn Qudama is not Allah and His Messenger. Ibn Taymiyyah, Imam al-Nawawi, these are great ulama, but they have a context. And if you look at the goals of the Sharia, then we need to rethink through in light of modernity, in light of the modern world that we live in, that what can and cannot be done, and obviously using the Quran and Sunnah. So he wrote an entire book, actually two volumes, it's massive, it's literally 1,000-something pages, each volume is massive volume, Fiqhul Jihad. What really is jihad? And how does one do jihad in the modern world? And why these groups are not correct in their interpretation of jihad. And obviously you can understand that this book gained him extreme antagonism and even death threats from those radical groups, right? From those groups, they considered him to be then a sellout and whatnot. Obviously, those groups, if you don't agree with them, they considered to be a murtad and a kafir. And astaghfirullah, but when he passed away online, those groups are rejoicing. These same fanatical groups are rejoicing. And astaghfirullah, they're saying, alhamdulillah, this person, a'udhu billah, is that this is their version of Islam. They rejoice when a scholar passes away. So this is some of his books, and there are many, many more. As for his activism and counsels, then honestly, a lecture alone will not suffice. Along with his academic career and scholarly pursuits and writings, he excelled as a khatib and a preacher and a leading public intellectual with a very visible appearance in all forms of media. And In Qatar, he began doing Islamic radio shows when radios were just coming out in that region. He was one of the first voices to have a radio show. And then when Islamic satellite channels began, and again, this is one of the key points that Allah bless Shaykh Qardawi to straddle technological advancements, right? So this is a new world coming out, and Shaykh Qardawi is an established figure, so he takes advantage of radio, and then of television, and then of satellite television, and then of internet. So again, he is at the right time and place to utilize these things. And he was one of the first to have an Islamic television series called Ash-Sharia wal-Haya, Sharia and Living Life. Even through the name, what is the name of the show? Sharia and Modern Life. Ash-Sharia wal-Haya. You see the vision of Shaykh Al-Qardawi. And he has a website, you can still log on to it, alqardawi.net. You can still log on to it, which summarizes all of his appearances, fatwa, and all of the articles that he has written. As for international awards and prizes, subhanAllah, literally a list of who's who, like who has not awarded him a prize. He has won the top prizes of pretty much every single country in the world. The World Islamic Bank in 1990, the King Faisal Award of Contribution to Islam in 1994, the top prizes of Malaysia, of the United Arab Emirates, Dubai, and Abu Dhabi back in 2000 when he was a good guy for them back then. Now things have changed, if you know. The top prizes in Qatar, the top prizes in Jordan. Like literally, the kings and the government, Awqaf, not the king, the Awqaf ministries of every country has handed him the top prize of its country. And he has been a part of pretty much every single major global and of that region councils of fiqh that are well known, and in some cases he was the president, and in some cases he was the founding member. Like he, once again, a who's who. So he was one of the senior members of Rabit al-Alam al-Islami and of the Islamic Fiqh Council of the global Rabit al-Alam al-Islami. And he is the founder of one of the most prestigious scholarly committees in the world today, and that is the Al-Ittihad Al-Alami Li'Ulama Al-Muslimin, the International Union of Muslim Scholars. He founded it, and he remained its president and chair until he resigned because of old age and health reasons just 3 years ago, 4 years ago. So he was the founder of this global union of ulama, which is one of the largest union of scholars around the entire globe, and he also founded the European Fiqh Council, and he presided over it until he had to resign because of his health and age. And he traveled to almost every country you can imagine in the world, multiple times to minority lands. He would regularly come to America. In the 70s and 80s, he would regularly attend the Mass and the ISNA conventions that would take place over here back in the day from the 70s. And he would go to South America, and he would go to Europe, and he would go to Australia. Along with this, he would go to the Muslim countries. Many times he visited India and Pakistan. All of these countries, well known. He would, again, during those phases, he would travel to pretty much every single country. And along with this, he had good relationships with the scholars of many different strands and interpretations of Islam. The Grand Mufti of Saudi Arabia, Sheikh bin Baz, did respect him, and there was friendship between them. Mufti Taqi Uthmani, Abu al-Hasan Ali Nadwi in the 90s. So all of these ulama, the global ulama, even in Tunisia, Sheikh Rashid Ghanouchi and others, all of these ulama had good friendships and relationships with Sheikh Yusuf al-Qardawi. Of course, Sheikh Yusuf al-Qardawi has always had an informal relationship with the Muslim Brotherhood. Of course, he was imprisoned because of this, as you know. Eventually, he decided to not have an official role. And so for the bulk of his life, he never had an official role within the Brotherhood. However, even though he didn't have an official role, it was known that he is considered to be the spiritual leader and the intellectual leader, and he himself would praise the Brotherhood, and he wrote a book, The History of the Muslim Brotherhood, in the last 70 years. So he has actually a book in Arabic about the history of the Muslim Brotherhood, and he did not make it a secret that he appreciated and admired the ethos and the spirit of the Ikhwan al-Muslimin. Now, what is his methodology in fiqh? Again, let's not get too technical, trying not to get too technical here. His methodology in fiqh was what he would call one of wasatism, yani moderation, in that he wanted the fuqaha to not blindly follow the books of fiqh, nor to discard the books of fiqh for modernity. He wanted a middle balance, And in this, as I said, he is taking from Rashid Rida, who is really the founder of this type of revivalism. In fact, again, to be a little bit academic, so please understand I'm being academic, don't read into what I'm saying here. Rashid Rida was the one who used the term Salafi. But what he meant by the term Salafi is not what the later movement adopted. Rashid Rida, by the term he said, we are going to be Salafi revivalists. Rashid Rida meant, before there were the madhabs, what were the tabi'un doing? Before the codification of the schools of law, what did the actual Salaf do? They were dynamic. They were vibrant. They were not blindly following a book of fiqh. They were deriving fiqh based upon the context, based upon the reality. They were looking at the Quran and Sunnah in lens of reality, and they were deriving fiqh. So this was Rashid Rida's version of Salafism. We're going to go back to the dynamism. We're going to overcome the legalistic encyclopedias of fiqh that were written 500 years ago, 600 years ago, 700 years ago. We cannot apply a book written 700 years ago to the modern nation state. We cannot take those rulings and simply cut and paste. We're going to have to go back to the original spirit of Islam. Now, this was Rashid Rida. One thinker, Shaykh al-Albani, took this notion and he had his own interpretation. And for him, going back to the Salaf meant an understanding of jumping over the madhabs and of being strict with the literal text of the hadith. So it wasn't the dynamism of Rashid Rida. It was a type of strict literalism. If the hadith says something, then we will extrapolate it to basically all times and places. Whereas Rashid Rida was like, okay, if the hadith says something, excellent. When should it be applied? What is the goal of it? What is the wisdom behind it? What are the exceptions to it? So there's a big difference between this strand and that strand. And Shaykh Yusuf al-Qaradawi definitely represented the strand that Rashid Rida was trying to advocate for. And if you read Fiqh al-Sunnah of Sayyid Sabiq, you get this understanding as well. So what Shaykh Yusuf al-Qaradawi was trying to say was the following. We need to look at the religion of Islam from the lens of that which cannot be changed and that which can be changed. The religion of Islam, Allah revealed it with certain things that are stable. These are called thawabit, belief in Allah, belief in Judgment Day, the explicit halal and haram. Then over the course of the next few centuries, our scholars extrapolated a very detailed code. That code, in and of itself, is not revealed by Allah. So we have the right, in fact, we have the duty to go back and see which aspects of the derived code can we change and which aspects can we and must we stick with. This is a common term he would use, الثوابت والمتغيرات. That which remains firm and that which can be changed. And therefore, he said, we need to look at the Sharia in light of modern times and taking into account the maqasid or the goals of the Sharia. Look at the modern context and don't just disconnect yourself from the world that we live in. And he was extremely concerned with minority situations. In fact, he was one of those who popularized the term Muslim minority fiqh, fiqh al-aqalliyat. He would argue that how Islam is practiced and the fatwas given for Muslims in America can and should be different for Muslim majority lands. This is a key point that many people disagree with. Many people say what is done in Muslim majority lands should also be done in Muslim minority lands. And Qaradawi was very clear, no, because context plays a role in deriving Islamic law. And context should and must be looked at before you pronounce the verdict. So he would very boldly say there is something called fiqh of minorities. And he was one of the biggest advocates of the fiqh of minorities. So and we're going to give some examples for this inshallah in a while. Also, one of the things that Shaykh al-Qaradawi did from the 60s and 70s, which is again what we expect from somebody of that stature, was that he was always a very politically savvy Shaykh and alim. He wasn't like many others who are cut off from what is happening in the world and only interested in teaching classical books. No, from day one, his khutbahs, his durus, his lectures are talking about current affairs. He brings up what's going on in the world. And he's a strong advocate of Muslim power, Muslim independence. He's a strong advocate of other powers not interfering in our lands. He is a strong advocate of rejecting the tyranny and injustices of so many regimes in the Muslim world, which obviously made him very unpopular with those regimes. And he was one of the biggest voices of a modern democracy that he would call an Islamic Shura democracy, a Shura version of democracy. He did not want dictatorships in the Muslim lands. He endorsed elections within the Sharia. He wanted the people to elect a ruler that was going to judge them in accordance with the Sharia. So he wanted to bring about a version of Islamic democracy, which you understand, of course, is going to be very, very problematic to the people in power. And this is one of the reasons why he was banned, and he is considered to be, to this day, a terrorist by many of the countries in that region. He always tried to strike a balance between pragmatism and idealism. And a simple example of this is his stances towards the superpowers. He criticized the invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan, and he was a big, a very forceful critic of the invasions of America, Afghanistan, and Iraq. And yet still, when a Muslim serviceman in the military asked him a fatwa that I'm in the military, I'm being forced by the American government to go and fight, what do I do? He said, you are muttar, you are forced. So you should not pick up a weapon and kill, but go find a job in the back of the army, basically, and basically peel potatoes type of stuff, right? Go do something there, and Allah will forgive you because you are muttar. Again, this raised a lot of controversy back then, but he's trying to find a middle ground. He criticizes the invasion, but he still understands there's Muslims living here. What are you going to do if you're part of the army, and now the army is going all the way there, and you're a Muslim in the army? And by the way, for those who remember, this was a major issue. You have to realize our armed forces have thousands of Muslims in them. What are they going to do? Are they going to go to jail? Are they going to get court-martialed? Or what exactly? Or can they go and do something? I mean, and again, I'm not giving my fatwa here. I'm saying Shaykh Qaradawi is trying to give some type of middle ground over here. He was also a very, very staunch supporter of the Palestinian cause. Hardly anybody was more vocal than him, and he was a fierce critic of Zionism and of the apartheid regime and of the modern state of Israel. But he would state many times, we don't have a problem with Judaism and the Jewish people. Judaism and the Jewish people lived with us for many centuries. Our problem is with Zionism, not with the Jewish people. So again, he's trying to find that middle ground over here. Now, some of the examples of the fatwas he's famous for. Perhaps the one fatwa that everybody knows is his fatwa on mortgages, right? That's the one fatwa everybody is aware of. One thing that's really interesting, he talks about this fatwa. He was challenged in his lifetime, and he explains that I would visit America and South America and Canada and Australia, and initially I would give the fatwa that it is haram. But when the Muslims kept on asking and asking and asking, and it was the most common question, pause here, footnote, to this day it is the most common question. To this day it is the most common question. And I have office hours, people call me up, I tell you still, you're going to be surprised, still the number one question. Shaykh, what is your opinion about financing a house? Even today, a few hours ago, somebody asked me the exact same question, right? Now, this shows you, you can find it, it shows you it is a pressing problem. It shows you it is something that affects all of us. So Shaykh Qadhi said, in the early 70s, I would follow the standard position, haram, haram, haram. Then when I realized this is a problem, I'm being asked around the globe, let me go back and to the books, and let me see what is there room or not. Then he released a systematic fatwa. Now is not the time to get into the intricacies. I don't want to do that today. But if you read it, it's actually a very interesting argument. What I find interesting, he was the first to say it, really, amongst the global ulama, that for Muslim minorities living in the West, the house they live in, if they cannot find an Islamic alternative, it is permissible to take that house as a mortgage, right? And he has a detailed explanation why, and he's quoting various principles and whatnot. And Many times he was challenged about it, and he said, listen, this is my opinion. If I am right, I ask Allah for a double reward, and even if I'm wrong, I hope Allah will give me one reward because I tried, which is a valid point. It's like, it's an opinion I have. I could be wrong, I admit. But if I'm wrong, I ask Allah to reward me once. I sincerely tried. And it is an interesting argument that what I find, again, whether you like it or not, and I speak as somebody who has lived through that fatwa since it came out in the 80s, and I was a teenager, and throughout my 20s when I was staunchly opposed to that fatwa during those phases of my life, and then 30s and 40s, I'm mellowing down, and then I see the majority of Islamic councils around the world are softening their stances and adopting the fatwa, even some of the more conservative fatwa councils. And again, I'll just be factual here, such as Amja recently released a fatwa which was markedly different from its tone 10, 15 years ago. And it was far closer to Shaykh Qardawi's fatwa. I'm just being factual, and I'm just, again, being historic over here. Even the very conservative scholars found themselves after 10, 15 years closer towards Qardawi's fatwa than they were 10, 15 years ago. And to me, this speaks volumes. This speaks volumes about his philosophy and where he is heading. Another interesting fatwa of his, which again, unprecedented in the modern world, but now it is pretty much the default in most fiqh councils. In the late 90s, I think, he was asked a question as the head of the European Fiqh Council. And he was the founding member of the European Fiqh Council. And our Fiqh Council of North America is taken from that, and we founded our Fiqh Council of America, FCNA. He is the EFCNA, the European Fiqh Council, EFCA. So the European Fiqh Council was asked about a very common scenario in England and America and Europe, and that is a Christian couple, Jewish couple, or majority Christian, the lady converts and the husband does not. The lady converts to Islam and the husband does not convert to Islam. What should be done? This question was presented to the European Fiqh Council, and Shaykh Qardawi wrote a very detailed fatwa in which he admitted that the mainstream madhahib would say this marriage is null and void. But he went in to bring maqasid, along with an understanding of modern times, along with explicit verdicts of Ali radiallahu anh and Umar al-Khattab radiallahu anh in their khilafas. They found precedent that in their khilafas, in the peripheral regions of Islam, not in Medina and Mecca, but in the lands of Iraq, which had just been conquered by Muslims, there were cases of a woman saying she wants to embrace and the husband saying, no, I'm happy as I am. And Ali radiallahu anh, and also before him Umar al-Khattab, the both of them, they allowed the husband and wife to remain married with the condition that the wife be allowed to practice Islam. And Shaykh Qardawi said, this is the fatwa we must be giving so that people embrace the faith. Otherwise, if you tell a lady who's interested in Islam, you have to leave your children, you have to leave your husband, it is better she embraces Islam. And again, to be clear here, this is not a Muslimah marrying a non-Muslim. No, this is, the marriage has taken place, they're both non-Muslims. Now, the wife wants to convert. Shaykh Qadawi says, I'll be the first to say, you're not going to find a fatwa in our era that allows this, but I shall allow it. And he wrote a detail, and you find it online, you find the book, a little booklet he's written, and other ulama. After this fatwa, again, initially in complete rejection. I will also tell you, even I, when I first heard this, and I was a student in the graduate school, I was like, no way he can prove this. In my mind, the Quran is explicit. But again, that's the difference between a minor student and an intellectual genius. He shows us, when does the Quran apply? He brought Ibn al-Qayyim's statement. Again, I don't want to go into technicalities. Ibn al-Qayyim did not explicitly mention this, but I don't want to get into technicality. Let me just say, it's a very scholarly explanation that convinced lots of people, and this fatwa is now extremely common across the globe in minority situations, in Western and American situations, even though before Shaykh Qardawi, nobody even knew of it. And it shows you the impact of, again, forward thinking and looking at the reality of the world that we live in. Also, one thing Shaykh Qardawi was well known for, and there's like 30, 40, 50 fatwa in this genre. Shaykh Qardawi was somebody who was a big advocate of rethinking through gender roles in light of modernity. Now again, you have to understand, and most of you who are above the age of 50, 40, 50, you know this. In the 70s, when Shaykh Qadhi first became a household name, let's say, there was a mass rejection of the elite of Islamic values. You all know this. The elites of Pakistan, of Cairo, of all of these lands rejected Islamic values of gender, Islamic hijab. Shaykh Qardawi wanted to, again, that wasati, wanted to find something where you still have religious folks at these elite institutions. And he began advocating, so the predominant fatwa, which is still common to this day amongst many circles, it is haram for a woman to do anything except almost exist, basically, right? That's all she can do. No leaving the house, no going to work, no this and that. You know, the standard things like that. Shaykh Qardawi in the 70s began advocating, saying, no, a lot of these rulings are cultural and not Quran and Sunnah. And here's the key point. In my opinion, it's very clear. He was not asking to rethink through the institution of marriage. He was very clear the primary role of a mother is for her children. الرجال قوامون على النساء. Men are qiwam over women. He was very clear. But why can't a woman work if she's wearing hijab and dressed properly? Why can't she be educated? Why cannot she have positions in places, and as long as everybody's observing Islamic norms and decency? You cannot stop this tide of gender change. So make sure you follow the laws of Islam and embrace what is good and stop what is bad. That's a level of pragmatism. Again, I'm just being factual here. You could oppose it as much as you want in the 70s. It didn't change the fact that the globe moved on, and essentially the Muslim world adopted that type of understanding when it comes to women working across the Muslim world. There's not a single country, except maybe one now, there's not a single country in which women can't get an education, in which women are not going to, get a job in corporate life or whatnot. In the Muslim world, you have to understand, back in the 60s and 70s, you either left Islam, didn't become religious, and you went and got a job in education. Or you remained religious and you stayed at home uneducated. Shaykh Qardawi understood you need a middle path. You need to be a good Muslimah and be allowed to have an education and be told, wear your hijab, interact with modesty, have as much, segregation socially as possible. And after this, it is permissible for a lady to be educated and work and whatnot. So again, a whole bunch of, fatwas in this regard, in which he's trying his best to give women a sense of dignity in the modern world while retaining their Islamic identity. And obviously, you understand this caused a huge backlash. It still causes a huge backlash. I don't know what to say. Again, I get in trouble saying this. The very people who don't like these fatwa and who think it is wrong, their own families can't live up to it. I'm just being blunt here. Their own daughters can't live up to it. You can preach in a vacuum as much as you want. You have to live in the real world. And Shaykh Qardawi's fatwas are the ones that have become the default. That's how we all live our lives. Even though in the 70s when he started this, it was a big thing to say that what's wrong for women, a housewife, she can become educated, she can have a job in corporation, but she must be told that, dress with dignity, avoid flirtation, men should be told this. So again, you take ownership of the situation, right? Rather than retreat to a model of Islam that might be very utopic, but it is not practical. You cannot and you will not live this way. Shaykh Qardawi is always that type of forward thinking. So again, these are some of his well-known fatwa. Let's move on to some of the more controversial before we conclude. And again, I'm just telling you so that you should be aware, inshallah ta'ala. And I'm not justifying or critiquing or whatnot. I'm just explaining, what he said and why it caused controversy. Without a doubt, what caused the most controversy in the West, so much so that in the last, 15 years or so, he was banned from America, England, Canada, Australia. Every Western country banned him. And eventually even Interpol released a warrant for his arrest until finally it was rescinded. It was a big political fiasco, whatnot. But the fatwa that caused the most controversy amongst the governments of the Western world was his fatwa that justified Palestinians to engage in military actions against the regime in which their death is almost guaranteed, if not fully guaranteed. Do you understand what I'm saying here? Or do I need to spell it out? He basically advocated that if certain conditions are met, suicide bombing is allowed for the Palestinians. Okay, now you understand the regime this is against is going to make this case and take it global, which is what they did. You guys following me, right? And is going to pressure the governments of the world to declare him a terrorist. You understand this point, right? So this is what they did, and they were successful in this. That all of this terrorism, quote unquote, in our land is because of him. And all of the people doing it is because of him. Now, regardless of whether you agree with it or not, and for the record, I always say publicly that I don't agree with suicide. And that's what I always say. But I'm being philosophical here. So I'm going to take off the cleric cap. I'm going to put on a semi-philosophical, my PhD cap. And I'm going to say that the fact of the matter is that every single civilization valorizes a person in battle who causes his own death to save other people or to bring damage to the enemy. This is a fact, whether you like the term or not. Remove the term. Remove the S term. The concept of somebody sacrificing himself for a greater good for his people. In fact, I gave a khutbah about the Ukraine invasion, in which a person who did the exact same thing against the Russians, BBC had a front page article about him. New York Times mentioned him, right? He blew up a bridge or whatever, and in the process, obviously he killed himself, right? They didn't choose the term. But what exactly did this person do? In fact, if you go over the prizes and awards that this country posthumously awards its people in Vietnam and whatnot, what is it, the Golden Award and the Medal of Honor and the Medal of Freedom and all of these, the prizes that they give, because how else are they going to actually reward the dead except by rewarding the living? They cannot reward the dead. Only a God can reward the dead, which is again why they're so scared of the religious fanatics, because, anyway, let's not get into the philosophy of all of that. Get into a lot of trouble, as you can imagine. It's a very sensitive topic, but I'm being a philosopher here right now, not being a sheikh now. In fact, forget Medal of Honor. What is that show you guys watch? The Star Wars show, right? The Star Wars franchise, right? What is it? The one of them, the Last Jedi. That Commander Holdo, what exactly does she do? The Commander Holdo, what does she do? She takes she takes her ship, right? And what does she do? I don't know. You guys are like the Death Star. Yeah, exactly. That's something like that. Yeah. She goes and crashes it into the Death Star and explodes herself. Right? Explodes herself. And everybody is clapping and in awe and thinks she's a hero. But nobody uses the S term in what she's done, even though that is exactly what she has done. Even children are taught that this is glorious when it's done for the right cause. Do you understand this point, right? I'm just being philosophical. Now I'll become Sheikh Yasir again and say suicide is haram. Okay. Now, suicide is haram. It's not even a joke. Suicide is haram. Okay. But anyway, you can disagree with Sheikh Qardawi's fatwa, but philosophically speaking, everybody valorizes a brave person who does something, even if it causes his own demise, for the cause that they believe in. So again, I'm just being factual over here. You can understand this fatwa has been used by the Nicolas Sarkozy, called Qardawi global terrorist because of this, and banned across the world. So you get the point here, okay? Yes, it is the concept of martyrdom. The concept of martyrdom is always valorized if you agree with the cause. The problem is if you don't agree with the cause, you're a terrorist. But if you agree with the cause, I mean, I always mention this. This country was founded when the founding fathers attacked the British soldiers. Some of them killed themselves in the process. Some of them killed. Anyway, you get the point here. If it's your cause, it's justified. Go look, and I'm being dead serious here. Go look at the medals of honor that have been awarded in Iraq, in Vietnam, and other places. The majority of them have gone to people who knowingly lost their lives in order to save other people or to harm the enemy. What is this other than the S word? What is it? But they don't call it that because they agree with the cause. So understand this more purely philosophically, but still suicide is haram. Now, another fatwa that caused a lot of controversy, and it was because of this fatwa that many Muslim lands banned him. So the first fatwa got him banned in those lands. The fatwa that caused him to be persona non grata in many of the Middle Eastern countries, including the country of his own birth recently, was of course his fatwa that the Arab Spring revolts were justified. And it is because of this and his role in the Arab Spring that many of the countries that admired and respected him in the 90s and early 2000s had a complete 180. And to this day, even he's passed away, his name is on the top 10 terrorists of the world list by many countries of the region who are of an Islamic or a Muslim heritage background. And there is no question that, again, I'm being factual here, I'm teaching here, there is no question that Sheikh Qaradawi took ownership of the Arab Spring. There's no question, you can't deny this. And he did put his personality behind the Arab Spring. And he would encourage people from Libya and Tunisia and Morocco and Egypt and across all over the Middle East when the Arab Spring was happening to take on these tyrannical regimes and dictators. And in fact, he even said when Gaddafi was almost about to fall, he even gave the infamous fatwa to the people, you may execute him and take your land back. He said this on TV. Again, I'm just stating for the record what he said. And to show you how much of a spiritual figure he was for the Arab Spring, when the Arab Spring was initially successful and الشعب يريد إسقاط النظام actually took place and Mubarak was taken out by the other powers and Tahrir Square became fully free, in February of 2011, after a 45+ year exile, Sheikh Qaradawi flew back to Egypt and gave what I would call the most iconic khutbah of his life, perhaps the pinnacle of his political acumen and achievements. He gave the khutbah in a free Egypt. He was chosen to give the khutbah. I mean, this shows you who this person was. The entire Arab Spring is, they think it's going to be successful. SubhanAllah, things happen after that. But at the time, they were all caught up in the spirit. And Sheikh Qaradawi flies back. And in Tahrir Square, he gives a khutbah in front of hundreds of thousands of people, watched by millions of people. And you need to listen to that electrifying khutbah to get a sense of who he is and his role in what is going on. And there's no doubt that that kind of represents the political acumen, if you like, of his the highlight of his life. Now, obviously, you understand that this fatwa and his role in the Arab Spring will make him not very popular in circles in which the regime's status is considered to be sacred. And there are many, many scholars, for whatever reason, let's not get into their niyat, who love to endorse the regime. Some of them are semi-sincere, and some have sold themselves for the highest bidder. I have no qualm saying that. But I know some of them are semi-sincere. So now you have a clash. And this clash has translated in him becoming, according to this group of scholars, a leading terrorist figure. And that's what they've done. They have, if you look at Twitter and whatnot, you find some groups of scholars saying, oh, this was a person who's a terrorist. All of the blood of Syria and whatnot goes on his hand. All of the blood of this goes on his hand. So it doesn't go on the people who killed, it goes on anyway. So you get the point here, right? So because of this, you have groups of scholars who are loyal to the regimes, who are loyal to the royal families, considering Shaykh Qardawi to be an instigator of fitna. And they call him the leader of the Kharijites and the mufti of the radicals. So these are the terms you find from this group. So you do your homework and see who is doing what. So this is another fatwa that got him criticized. One fatwa that I found extremely interesting, and it got him a lot of criticism from the academic class, nothing to do with the politics, and I just want to mention it, and I neither endorse nor criticize, I'm just saying it. For the record, I'm just telling it to you. I just find it interesting, which is, again, you had to be Qardawi to do this. Whether you like it or not, nobody else could get away with this. Shaykh Qardawi took on the notion of stoning the adulterer to death. And he said, for the longest time, I found this issue problematic, and I didn't know what to say or make of it, until finally I felt that my conscience had to be clear, and I had to preach what I think is the truth. He said, and this is a very, very minority opinion, he isn't the first. Before him you had Sheikh Zarqa and Dr. Muhammad al-Ghazali and others, but he was the most famous, and he also was the most, he proved it, not proved it, from his perspective, he wrote about it and he spoke about it. His position, and interesting, again, for the record, I'm not endorsing and I'm not criticizing, I'm just telling you. His position is that there is no stoning of the adulterer in Islam. And he has a very interesting series of arguments. Very simplistically, he says what happened was, I'm being very simplistic, what happened was the Jewish tribes of Medina came to the Prophet ﷺ, and they had an adulterer. And he asked them, what do your books say? And they said, our books say stoning. So he said, well, then you should follow your law. And they did that. According to Shaykh Qardawi, that was not instituted for the ummah. And he has Quranic evidence. He goes Surah Al-Ahzab and Surah Al-Nur is very clear what you do with the adulterer. The Quran is so explicit about the adulterer. How then can this ruling come which seems to contradict the Quran? And so he has his argument and he goes, I have no choice now except to preach my conscience. And if I'm right, 2 rewards. If I'm wrong, 1 reward. And of course, this position goes against everybody else, basically, right? Even though I don't understand why there's so much of a backlash when nobody actually applies this anymore. It's just a theoretical law, but I think it's an emotional attachment that we have, that people. In any case, you should be aware that he had this type of view as well. Now, to summarize and conclude, if you look at the reactions to his passing and demise, and again, being factual here, large groups of the ummah, frankly, the vast majority of the ummah, even those who disagreed with some of his fatwa, express rahmah, remorse, dua for him. The mainstream bulk of all movements of Islam have an admiration for him. The icons of classical Salafism, Shaykh ibn Baz and Shaykh Albani and others, even if they disagreed, they respected him as an alim. Mufti Taqi Uthmani and the Deobandis respect him as an alim. Even if they don't agree with every fatwa, you cannot deny his scholarship. If you look at those who deny him as a scholar, frankly, one of 3 people, one of 3 categories. Number 1, outright Zionists and enemies of the deen, who are happy at his death. Number 2, those groups of people who ascribe themselves to knowledge, who are complete stooges of their regimes. Complete stooges. They are not actual ulama, and you know them from their reality, whatnot. And number 3, the actual fanatical fundamentalists, the hardcores, takfiri and jihadis, who are living in their own bubble and alternative, and some very small pockets of the fundamentalist movements and whatnot. You find them their versions of Islam are so unreal that except for them and 5 people that follow them, the entire world is dal and mudil. The entire world is gumrah and mistaken and whatnot. And as I said, I've been with them for so many years. I know this reality. It's painful to say. I'm not trying to make fun of them, but I'm being factual. Anytime you meet these people, do your own research. Their own families cannot live up to their version of Islam. I'm just being factual. Anytime you meet these types of people with their hardcore understandings and whatnot, their own children, frankly, their own spouses cannot live up to that version. What type of Islam are you preaching when you can't even enforce it in your own family? You think the rest of the world is going to follow it? You find those types of people, as well, saying, oh, his views are so progressive and whatnot. In any case, subhanAllah, to conclude, Shaykh Qardawi, in my humble opinion, exemplified Islamic scholarship at every level. To master the theory and the practice, to be an alim in every field of Islam, to understand that Islam has to be practical and yet still traditional and orthodox, and to make Islam more than just fatwa and books, to make Islam a force, a revival, to be involved in making Muslims feel proud of their Islam, to be involved at the political level, to be involved at Muslim minorities across the globe, to be a global visionary. Frankly, there is no one that compares to him in this aspect for the last 100 years since Shaykh Rashid Rida, and he has left a vacuum that Allahu Alam how and when it will be replaced. And I finish with one aspect of his life that I did not mention. Along with all of this, he was also a poet. He was also a person of adab and literature. And this is, again, very common among such intellectuals. He would versify Arabic poetry, and he has some poetry that he would sometimes say in a khutbah, and there's a clip going viral that he's saying this poetry and he's crying as he says it. It's beautiful in Arabic. I'll translate it into English. That wallahi, the da'wah will never be defeated by force. The da'wah of Islam will never be defeated by force. Burn my ribs with whips. Put my hands in chains. Place a knife at my throat. My ideas will never be besieged even for an hour, and my faith will not be impacted. The light of Allah is in my heart, and my heart is in the hands of my Lord. And my Lord grants me victory and is my helper. My success shall be found by holding on to the rope of my iman, and I shall die smiling to give life to my faith. And he would say this in the face of tyrants. He would say this when his life is threatened. He himself was threatened multiple times. His own family members were unjustly arrested. His daughter and son-in-law were arrested for no reason other than the fact they lived in Egypt and they were related to him. They have nothing to do with Islamic activism. Thrown in jail for over a decade, wallahu musta'an. Even though they had green cards and potential US citizenship, this is the reality of the world we live in. Still he stood firm, and he stood upon, inshaAllah ta'ala, what he believed to be the truth. And now that he has gone, we make sincere dua for him, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgives any mistakes he would have made, that grants him Firdaus al-A'la, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows us to benefit from his legacy and allows us to keep that spirit of Islamic activism and dynamism alive. Wa jazakumullahu khairan. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.